In this video, we are going to read a graph for domain, range, find where it's increasing, decreasing, and where it's above and below the x-axis. So let's start with domain. Domain is always read left to right. So reading this graph, the furthest left I see doesn't have a point. Even if it didn't have an arrow, furthest left, x goes as negative infinity, right would be positive infinity. So this is going to start at negative infinity. And the furthest right I see the graph has a dot. Anytime it has a dot there, we would say it stops at that value. So domain is going to go all the way to the left, and then it's going to stop at 5, and it does have a y value at 5. It's not an open circle, so we're going to include it. Versus range is read down to up. Down to up. So the furthest down I see the graph is down here at this point. That y value is -2. It isn't an open circle, so we're going to include it. So we're going to start at -2, and the furthest up I see the graph has an up arrow. So it's going to go up forever. So it's going to go from -2 all the way to infinity would be the highest y value. Up is infinity, down is negative infinity for y. Increasing and decreasing. So I'm just going to start by highlighting what I think is increasing. So if I start this graph, that is not increasing. That is falling left to right, so I'm not going to highlight that. I'm just going to highlight what is rising. So there's increasing. The next piece is falling. I'm not going to highlight it. This is increasing. It's rising left to right. And the last piece is decreasing, so I'm not going to highlight it. So increasing, I have it in yellow. There are 2 intervals where we're increasing. So these are always x values. So I'm going to start where I'm increasing here. That x value is -2. And we go up to this x value here. Don't be confused by the y value. The y value is 5, but these are always x intervals. So we're going to start at -2, and that x value we go to is 0. We never include endpoints for increasing or decreasing. And then this next interval goes from here to here, and I want to read that in terms of x values. So I'm going to start at 1 and go to 3. So I'm going to union 1 to 3. When it's more than one interval, we put a union symbol. Now I'm going to go back in and try to highlight what's decreasing. So I have this piece here that is decreasing. I have another piece here that's decreasing. I have 3 decreasing intervals to write, always in terms of x values. So I'm going to start with the x value. It's going all the way to the left. So it's going to start at negative infinity and then stop at this x value here. This x value is -2. Union, I'm going to have 3 intervals to write. So this x value here, the x value is 0. We never use y values. 0 to 1 would be decreasing. And then my final interval starts at the x value 3 and goes to the x value 5. So union 3 to 5, always round parentheses for increasing and decreasing. So we have where we're rising and where we're falling. And now we're going to switch gears to where we are above and below the x-axis. So we want to read these correctly. If we have f of x is less than 0, we are looking below the x-axis. I want to find all intervals that I believe to be below the x-axis. So I just have this little interval here to write. In terms of x values, and these look like they're going to be decimal values, that's okay. I can just estimate what they are. So I would say that x value is almost -3, so maybe -2.9. To the x value is somewhere between -2 and -1. I'm going to say -1.5. Are those going to all be below the x-axis? No, the y value for -2.9 is 0, so it's not below quite there. And same thing with -1.5. That y value looks like it's 0, so not a negative output right there. Versus my other interval of where it's above the x-axis, where f of x is bigger than 0, we're looking above the x-axis. has a lot more pieces to it. So a lot more of the graph. We have this interval here. So we have one interval and then this whole other interval. So two intervals are above the x-axis. That first interval we have goes all the way to the left, so it's going to start at negative infinity. And then it's going to stop at that x value negative 2.9, which has a y value of 0, so we're not going to include it as being above. Union, it's going to start at negative 1.5 for that x value and go all the way over to 5, which has a 0 y value, so I'm not going to include it. If 5 was above, if it stopped here at the 0.51, I would include that endpoint because it would all be above the x-axis. But 5 happens to touch the x-axis again, so I'm not going to include it. Lastly, I am asked to plug in x is 3 and see what the y value is. So for x is 3, that y value is 4. And now we've just interpreted domain, range, increasing, decreasing above and below the x-axis.